Or if you have something else that you can put on there. Like just. I'm going to start it.
I just needed to push.
Okay. Did you want to do your introductions already?
Yeah, I will actually. Thank you. All right. Can you guys hear me back there? Is that pretty good? Is that mic pretty good? Higher? We'll test it out. All right, I'm going to project while he really gets that microphone going. My name is Moral Jones. I'm the director here at the Pueblo Heritage Museum. Much kudos and thanks to the awesome team of board members, volunteers, interns, my other fellow staff, Ciati Rose Stevens, who helped make this possible, as well as, of course, our speakers tonight who will introduce themselves. Let's have a round of applause to start off tonight. And I do want to call to attention that we have events coming up. We have our final Friday for the amazing artists in this room, Rhonda Garcia, who's a local artist, and she is having a final Friday on Friday, July 28th from 5 to 8 p.m. So she can have a final push for this amazing original art. And then actually on August 4th, I'm really excited to announce that myself, along with other artists who will be part of the open mic, will be featured at our first Friday in August, which will also be a benefit for a worthy nonprofit in our world. So you can find our website and our Facebook for more information on that. And then we also later this week have heritage crafts for kids and adults alike will be making dream catchers. That's a really affordable class for only $10 on Friday, and also charity yoga on Friday. So we've always got a lot going on. And if you're interested in helping a program with us or volunteering with us, please let us know. And I think that's it. We've got water here. If you're ever super thirsty, you don't have a donation, please just take one, we'll restock it. The donations are just to help us cover our costs with that. And then restrooms are out here. And feel free at any time to come and get me if you need anything at all. And then we're going to go ahead and kick it off with our amazing speakers who will introduce themselves. We're going to be enjoying some amazing song and also some history about the Buffalo Soldiers. So I'm going to go and hand it off to Kennedy first to start us off.
Hello everyone. So one of the things that we're going to do tonight is that we are just going to relax and we're just going to have a good time. We're going to experience some different things, a little bit about James Beckwourth, and then we're going to go into the importance of music with my friend JoAn Gilmore-Jackson, who is a award-winning gospel singer, and so you are all in for a really great treat, and then we'll just go on from there. But we might ask you to participate a little bit too, just warning you now, all right? So, and then and I must also say is that when you don't participate, we really kind of call out those people a little bit more. So just to let you know. So this was a monologue that I did some years ago for the Ghost Walk in Pueblo. And it was on James Beckwourth. And so I'm going to do that for you. Do I look like a liar to you? Don't answer that. Well, that's exactly what people have called me for years, a liar. Me, James Beckwourth, the legendary mountain man, crow Indian chief, explorer, guide, and trapper. I guess people used to have a hard time stomaching that a black man like myself could truly be all those things. But I'm the real deal. I published my autobiography during my lifetime. The life and adventures of James P. Beckwourth. Pretty much everything I wrote has been proven to be true. Of course, there might have been a few slightly exaggerated mountain man tales, but for a mountain man, the only sin is the sin of being dull, and that I never was. I was born about 1800 in Virginia to Sir James Beckwourth and one of his slaves. My father was a fair man. Not only did he educate me like a legitimate son, but he also went to court 3 times to acknowledge my deed of emancipation for me. He wanted to make sure that his son was a free man. But I had a restless spirit, and I longed for adventure. I was learning the trade of a blacksmith and found that work to be monotonous. So adventure called. I had a strong desire to see the celebrated Rocky Mountains and the great western wilderness that so many people were talking about. I was a wrangler for his expedition to explore these mountains. The Indians soon became friendly to me, and I was indebted to them for showing me their choicest hunting grounds. There were days you'd hear stories of pioneers and people settling on the Old West. But I smile in comparison to their sufferings with what myself and the other mountain men endured. The forts that afforded them protection for these travelers were built by ourselves at the constant peril of our lives, without wives or children to comfort us along our lonely way, without well-furnished wagons to resort to when hungry, no roads before us but trails, our clothing consisting of skins and of animals, often whole days of insufficient rations, entirely without food. These are sufferings which make their accounts seem trivial in comparison. Now, during this time, a story began to circulate in the West that I was actually the long-lost son of a Crow Indian chief. The story went that I had been abducted by the Cheyennes and sold to the whites, where I had been raised ever since. Well, one day when I was setting traps, I blundered into an Indian horse herd and immediately was captured by their guards. While I was being marched into the village, Virgil, watching from afar, saw clearly that he couldn't help me and went back to the encampment to tell the tale of my certain death. Well, while my friends were lamenting my untimely fall, I was being hugged and kissed to death by a whole lodge of near and dear Crow relatives. Even if I should deny my Crow origin, they wouldn't believe me. How could I dash their joy? I went on to distinguished myself as a warrior and won the rank of the Kilroy chief. I married 8 wives during my lifetime with the crow and perfected one of the most valuable skills, stealing horses. Now, I suppose you've been wondering, this man is fascinating, but where do we come in? What does this fine fellow have to do with Pueblo? Well, my friends, the Santa Fe Trail, I was traveling for a bit. I ended up in Taos and shackled myself to another woman, Louisa Sandoval. I took my wife and we reached the Arkansas in 1842, where I erected a trading post. In a very short time, I was joined by 15, 20 trappers and their families. Soon we had grown to a little settlement and we gave it the name Pueblo. I recognized the beauty of its situation here next to the Arkansas. Now, I would leave periodically on business, and upon returning home one time, I found that home was not quite the home it had been. My wife had married another man. And when she realized her mistake, of course, she offered herself back again, but I declined, preferring to enjoy once more the sweet blessings of single blessedness. I was a wanderer, always searching for the next opportunity and adventure. You know, I was a guide for one of the first groups who used my pass, in California, called the James Beckwourth Pass. And a little girl described it like this. Ours was the first, oh no, I'll do it. Ours was the first of the covered wagons to break the trail through the Beckwourth Pass into California. We were guided by the famous scout, Jim Beckwourth, who was a historical figure, and to my mind, one of the most beautiful creatures that ever lived. I'm just reading what she wrote here. I guess I made it quite an impression on that little girl. And I hope that I made an impression with all of you on this fascinating, adventurous story of a man. He was a character. It's kind of fun just to hear. I would have loved to meet him in person. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, what an interesting life. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Ms. JoAn Gilmore-Jackson, who you will see later on. Well, I'll just leave it at that.
I don't know what he's talking about.
You'll see what I mean later. Push the square button. There it is. It's on.
I was elected.
Oh.
Oh, even it talks to me.
The problem isn't that it talks to you, it's that you don't listen.
Obviously. How sweet the that saved the wretch like me. I was lost, oh, but now am found. Was blind, oh, but now I see through many dangers tossed and snares. I have I've already come. It was grace that brought me safe thus far. And grace will lead me home. I know out on the road, the Buffalo soldiers probably thought, oh my God, this is hard. Who's helping us? We're attacking people. We're trying to build bridges. We're trying to make a safe passage for the settlers to get from north, south, east, west. And it's just so hard and it's so toiling. So when I was thinking about what song I needed to sing to remind me of the Buffalo Soldiers, and this is the one that I chose, and I hope you enjoyed it.
As JoAn mentioned, you know, their music was so important to the African people. Spiritual is a type of religious folk song that is closely associated with the enslavement of African people in the American South. The songs proliferated in the last few decades of the 18th century, leading up to the abolishment and legalization of legalized slavery in the 1860s. The African American spiritual, also called the Negro spiritual, constitutes as one of the largest and most significant forms of the American folk song. One of the things that happened was during slavery that carried on to the Buffalo Soldiers is music was a way of communicating. And they did that a lot with what was called call and response songs. So let's do a call and response song so that way they can get an idea. Let's do Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, Turn Me Around, Turn Me Around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, marching out the freedom's way.
Ain't gonna let tell me wrong, tell me wrong,
ain't gonna let nobody
tell me wrong. Keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the King's Highway.
We have different lyrics than we do.
That's because you don't know the song. Hey, you know the song.
I know the song. I just know the different version of the song. She says, marching up.
No.
Yes.
Because I told him.
You know,
No.
this happens
I
all the
told him,
time.
yes, you were right.
This is what I told you. I did not tell you. I said that. Shoot.
He needs to learn to behave. Because I'm gonna tell you the truth. Because I'm not James Beckwourth or Kennedy Pugh. But I'm gonna tell you one thing about him. Okay, I said, Kennedy, we should probably go over in depth a program so that we have it smooth and correct. I got this. Oh no, we don't need to do all that. You just gotta make it hard for me. People don't know how to act. And you know what? I'm gonna take him outside when we leave. I'm gonna beat him. And the next time I bring him back, he don't know how to act. Okay? So y'all forgive him right now because he's out of control.
All right, I got a lot of witnesses here. So,
I'd rather sing Michael. I don't want to sing that song. I'd rather sing Michael Row the Boat.
because you don't know the lyrics.
I do know the lyrics to Michael Row the Boat
Okay, that's
ashore.
it.
Michael row the boat ashore. Hallelujah. Michael row the boat ashore. Hallelujah. Again. Michael row the boat ashore. Hallelujah. Michael row the boat ashore. Hallelujah.
See, I think that there's something else that goes after Michael Row the Boat Ashore. And I think that we're forgetting. I think it's something. Sister. What is it? Sister helped to set the sail.
Well, if you would be patient and let us get to the verses, maybe we can do them.
Okay. Sister.
I want the audience to help. I don't want you. I don't like you. And you know what? The more I visit with you and see you, I like you less and less. So I'm going to have, I thought this lovely lady here, I'm going to try to see if this mic will go back there. Excuse me. I want her to help us sing, sister.
Why don't you bring her up here?
Well, she doesn't
Leslie,
want
come
to.
on.
I think that if we get a professional, real professional person to tell us this, we'll know. I want you to take this mic, and I know it's going to be hard, and it's a task to stand by Kennedy. Because that's all I can do is stand by him, so I know you're not
I
going to be
love
one.
this woman.
Yes, okay. All right, sister, help to set the sail, right?
Sister help to set the sail. Hallelujah. Sister help to set the sail. Hallelujah. Michael Rowe. Michael row the boat ashore. Hallelujah. Michael row the boat ashore. Hallelujah.
Now see,
You
I think I'd take my show on the road with him. I think I would like to leave him out of it altogether because he doesn't know how to act, and I can't teach him.
You all sound
I
really,
can't
really
teach him.
good.
Yes, they did. They sounded just like a perfect choir, something that you have never heard of. So they practiced in their minds. They said, "I remember singing that in grade school." Do you remember singing that in grade school?
I do a little bit. I don't know
Oh, a little bit. Well, see, it needs to be a lot of understood.
So
we all understood.
What other songs do you know that you probably sang?
Well, they want to sing "Row, Row, Row Your Boat" in 3 parts, and they want it to end as one begins. Remember that when we did that way back then? Now I'm not young. I mean, you're not gonna believe this, but I am 69 years old. And I have to put up with this young boy here that don't know how to act, and he's trying my patience.
Yeah, he's not that young.
Well, he's 60. He's 60 years old, but you know what? Kennedy is the sweetest thing I know. So you will be third. You will bring up the rear. So you go back there so you know when to come in with row row. This section here is going to be first, and the middle is going to be second, and you will be third. And try to first, second, third. Okay? All right. I'm going to sing with the first, and then I want my friend there to sing with the second to bring them in. You want a microphone? Let's pass that back.
Oh yeah, that was wireless.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. And it's not going to go in back there. Okay. All right, people. All right. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Now, second group, wait. Let's do the second group. Now, let's do you. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. And Kennedy?
Oh, this we got it. Right.
We're not going to hold our breath. Go ahead.
Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
Okay, when I point, we're going to start because we don't finish the whole sentence before the next group come in, okay?
Okay.
So it goes like, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is merrily, 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 life is merrily, 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 traveling down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is merrily, merrily, life is merrily, life is merrily. Very good.
Oh, she said she's done. I'm going to sing for you a song called Hold On. A song called Hold On. No one, okay, somebody keep that. No one let me come in. Do all fasten windows in. I gotta clap. Actually, you know what? You know what I really want you to do? I want you to stop. Don't speed it up. No one let me come in. Do all fasten windows in. Keep your hand on the ground. Hold on. Hold on, hold on, keep your hand on the plow, hold on. No one said you lost your track, can't plow straight and keep you looking back. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on. Hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on. Mary had a golden chain, every link was Jesus' name. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on. Hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on. If you wanna get to heaven, keep your hand on the gospel plow. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on. Hold on, hold on. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on. Hold on, hold on. I had JoAn doing that for me
Oh,
last time. It didn't work out so good.
That's because I quit stopping and clapping because he was irritating me, and I didn't want him to have the right percussion, so I ignored him.
We're gonna wrap it up.
Okay.
Why don't we have you sing another song?
Oh, okay.
This is a song that JoAn sings quite a bit, and it's a beautiful song. Anyway, thank you all, and then we're gonna have Ray Brown is coming in to talk a little bit about Buffalo Soldiers, and he's a great guy that has done some great things with spreading that history throughout Colorado and beyond. But we'll let JoAn finish off our segment for tonight. Thank you all for letting us be here.
This is the King's song, and I sing it on lots of occasions because it seems appropriate for no matter whatever it is I'm doing. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with the word or song, if I can show somebody they are traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. My living shall not be in vain if I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain.
Wow, that was so amazing. Let's get a snap if you love that. Snap. I loved how interactive that was. Thank you so much to Kennedy and JoAn. Let's give them another round of Now we're really in for a treat with Ray Brown coming up to present. I'm just going to switch over to the speakerphone, but we're going to go right in for sake of time. So I'm going to hand the mic to him and let him introduce himself as he prepares to actually give us a short presentation about the Buffalo Soldiers as well as other things that he'd like to share with us, right?
Thank you. I'm going to try this out loud because it works better, I think. Can you imagine growing up in the 50s and 60s? And by the way, JoAn, I'm 69 too. But growing up and not knowing your history, not knowing anything about your history, and not understanding what it was that we did as a people in the United States. And that's the way our history was. I didn't learn about Buffalo soldiers until I went to a Buffalo Soldier post when I was after I graduated from college and was commissioned as second lieutenant in the United States Army. I had never heard what a Buffalo Soldier was. I'd never been introduced to them. Didn't know that Fort Huachuca, where I was stationed, was a Buffalo Soldier post and was a segregated post and had 2 officers' clubs. And the Negro officers couldn't visit the white officers' club. And I thought, my goodness, what is up with this? But the first day that I got there to Fort Huachuca, the duty officer says to me, he says, Ray, he says, we don't have anything for you. It's Sunday, but Monday morning you go to work, okay? They said, hey, you know what? You ought to check out Sierra Vista, drive around the post a little bit, get to be a little bit more familiar with what's going on there. Oh, by the way, there's a museum right across the parade field from where we're at right now. He says, you should go down and look at that. And I walked in the door, and what I was greeted with was a bunch of pictures of African-American men in military uniform, and I said, who the heck are those guys? Who the heck are these guys? And so I personally started doing research on my own to try to understand who the Buffalo Soldiers were. So when I started doing these presentations, and I didn't start doing the presentations until probably the early 2000s, but when I started doing these presentations, I thought it was important that people just understand who the Buffalo Soldiers are and show the uniform and talk about stories about these guys and what they did during their time in the military. But then I started learning that there were more guys. And one of the first things that I did was Miss Lucille Corsentino says to me in 2014, Ray, I think there's Buffalo Soldiers buried at Roselawn Cemetery. And I said, whoa, this is so cool. And so I went to Roselawn Cemetery and looking for these Buffalo Soldiers, and I didn't find them. What I found opened another door. And that door was, these were Civil War veterans. These were African Americans that were in the Civil War that are buried at Roselawn Cemetery. So, I mean, that's just like, wow. You always wondered, what the heck did the black people do during the Civil War? Did we just wait and see who was going to win? Or did we participate? Well, my story talks about the participation of those men. And while I was doing that, some gentleman, while I was doing a presentation, says to me, well, what about the Revolutionary War? Hey, have you thought about the French and Indian War? And I said, what are you talking about? He says, did you not know that the African American has been involved in every armed conflict that the United States has been involved with since the beginning of time? I said, what? How is this possible that nobody talks about this? How is it possible?
But there is some paintings of those wars.
Well, yeah, just kind of in the street, you know, they're kind of off to the side sometimes. When you talk about the Revolutionary War, or actually, the Revolutionary War, as George Washington is going across the Potomac, there's a black man sitting there next to him. All right? So yeah, they're there, but a lot of times you don't know. And you don't know what you've never been told. And so when I started doing these presentations, I talked about the Buffalo Soldiers. And I got all these nice stares from third graders, and these third graders kind of looked at me like, yeah, black guys are in the Army. Cool. I don't know what's important about the Buffalo Soldiers, but black guys are in the Army. I understand that. And I said, maybe I'm not getting it. So then I said, well, how about if I go back in time and I tell you a little bit about slavery, and then I go into the Civil War, and then I start talking about the Buffalo Soldiers. And what about the Tuskegee Airmen? You know? So all of these stories, here's something that I found to be totally amazing to me. I grew up in Colorado Springs in a church called Payne Chapel AME Church. There were 3 Colorado-based Buffalo or Tuskegee Airmen that were in our congregation. And I never understood what a Tuskegee Airman was. I never understood the struggles that those men went through to get to where we are today. So when I give my presentations, I don't just give a history of this group of men who were Buffalo soldiers. I want to try to give you guys some education. I always like to ask this question, and some of you guys have heard this question before. When were the first African Americans allowed entry into West Point Military Academy? What?
40s?
1940s? Anybody else?
1970.
1970? 1870. 5 years after the end of the Civil War, the first 2 African Americans from southern states earned entry into West Point Military Academy. One guy dropped almost immediately. The other guy spent 4 years. He spent 4 years, and in his 4th year, he was found tied to his bed, his ears were slashed, his hair was cut, and they wanted to court-martial him for self-inflicting wounds. This man was so eloquent in his writings. It was absolutely amazing. One of the first African American graduates from West Point. Henry Flipper, 1877. First of 20 African Americans that were allowed entry into West Point Military Academy. And when you think about that, you say, wow, what did this guy have to endure? No one would talk to him. No one would eat with him. No one would sleep in the same room with him. The only time anyone addressed him is when they gave him a military order. How about that as a life for 4 years? Yet he graduates from West Point, gets commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the United States Cavalry. He comes out west. He fights against Victorio, the Apache chief. He bears messages between Grierson, Colonel Grierson, and the troops out in the field. There's so many stories. It's absolutely amazing what we don't know. And if you can imagine being from a community where you don't know anything about your history and how it relates to United States military history. And that's what I talk about when I do my presentations, United States military history. How many people have been to White Front Aircraft Museum? How many people have seen the United States military history display with all the black faces on the wall? Right by the B-29 bomber. Okay? That's my display. And it's basically mimicking the display that I saw at Fort Huachuca, except for I start with the French and Indian War, and I go to Vietnam. And I talk about segregation. A lot of people don't realize that. The United States military was segregated from the beginning of time all the way through the end of the Korean War. The black units that were there were treated less than fairly. It's tough when you're fighting a battle against the enemy and then find out that you have more of a battle with the people that are on your side. And that's what these guys dealt with. There's a story. Everybody thinks the Tuskegee Airmen were the first African-American flyers, right? Not true. There's a gentleman who was from Georgia. He goes to Europe in before World War I. He joins the French army. Ultimately, they say, "By God, you're a good fighter. You can shoot exceptionally well. We're going to put you in an airplane." So they make him a gunner in an aircraft. And then they say, you know what? You're pretty good. We're going to make you a pilot. And they make him a pilot. This man fights the entire World War I battles. He fights it all. When the Americans enter the war, he goes to the Americans and says, I'm an American citizen. I'd like to be a pilot for you guys. And they say, absolutely not. We don't accept blacks in our units. Army Aviation won't accept you. Okay? Those kinds of stories are there. How about World War II? Oh, heck, don't even do that yet. World War I. Buffalo Soldiers? How many Buffalo Soldiers go to fight World War I? Anybody know? The answer is 0. They don't let them go. They don't let them go. There is such a concern in the United States during the World War I time frame that they are afraid that if they give these black men weapons and they send them to fight in Europe, they're not sure where they're going to fire those rounds. So they don't want them to have guns. So they train an entirely new African American force, and they send those guys to fight World War I. Now they call themselves Buffalo Soldiers, but they're not. They're absolutely not Buffalo Soldiers. But they used the name because the name meant something to those men. Okay? Yes, sir.
40 years later, though, I mean, those guys could be fairly old.
What time were these Buffalo Soldiers?
Oh, the Buffalo Soldiers? So the Buffalo Soldier Organization basically at the end of the Civil War, the United States government said we're going to do a couple of things. The Negro did an exceptionally good job fighting in the Civil War, so we are going to create an all-encompassing military. And they said, as soon as you recruiters go out there and recruit these black guys, we're going to incorporate them into your units. There wasn't a one that was recruited. They didn't want them in the military. So the government says, hey, no problem. We'll just make them as segregated units. So they created 2 cavalry regiments, the 9th and the 10th U.S. Cavalry. They created 4 infantry regiments, the 38th, 39th, 40th, and 41st Infantries. All of them about 1,000 men strong. Okay? They never filled all of those ranks in the infantry side, but they did fill the 9th and 10th U.S. Cavalry. Here's a nice story for you. George Armstrong Custer, everybody remember him? Great name, right? That guy was offered to keep his brigadier general status if he would take command of the 8th or the 9th or the 10th U.S. Cavalry, the Black Cavalry. And he said, absolutely not. That would destroy my military career, and I will not do it. And they said, well, fine. If you won't take the command of a black unit, then you can be a lieutenant colonel again, your regular Army rank, and you can have the choice of whichever regiment you want. By God, I want the 2nd. Okay? Now, the African Americans were there when George Armstrong Custer got handed his lunch, and they were saying, dodge that one. Right? They were there. But they were another one of those units that was kind of told, go off this way, when George went off the other way to attack the Native Americans. And then he lost his lunch. Okay? So anyway, there are so many stories, and I would love to spend lots and lots of time with you guys to tell you all of the stories that I know. I was going into World War I. World War I, not one Buffalo Soldier, including the officers, were not allowed to go and fight the war. There was a gentleman by the name of Charles Young. Charles Young was the 3rd African American to graduate from West Point. He graduated in 1889, went through the ranks, became a colonel in the United States Army. He would have been promoted to a brigadier general status in World War I, except for the government said, absolutely not. We cannot allow a black man to command white soldiers. Okay? Let that sink in. We cannot. They medically discharge this man and don't allow him back in the military until after World War I is over. Okay? There's another man, Benjamin Oliver Davis Sr. How many people know Benjamin Oliver Davis Sr.? You're not raising your hand. He spends 50 years in the United States military. He goes from the rank of a private to a sergeant first class. He goes into officer candidate school. He becomes a lieutenant. He goes through the ranks. They send him to the Philippines during World War I. And he stays in the Philippines as a supply officer. All right? World War II, just before World War II, they promoted him to brigadier general. He's the first African American general officer in the military. Humble beginnings, guys. At the turn of the century, there were 3 African American officers in the military. 3.
Turn of which century, Greg?
So, 1900. Okay? In 1900, there were only 3 black officers in the military. Charles Young, Benjamin Oliver Davis Sr., and this other gentleman, John Ernest Green. Now, you want to know what's pretty fascinating about John Ernest Green? He's my great uncle. And I didn't find out about him until about 5 years ago. I didn't even know he was in the military. He spends 29 years in the military. He's a lieutenant colonel by the time he decides to retire. But he's in Haiti during World War I. Okay? World War II is another one of those disasters. The military has made a decision that they are going to do everything in their power to ensure the African American gets no recognition, and they keep the African Americans in service support organizations. Until the Tuskegee experiment, forced by Eleanor Roosevelt, until that actually gets kicked off, they had no intentions of allowing an African American to fly a military aircraft. Okay?
How did Eleanor Roosevelt intervene to have that done?
She went to the training program and said, I want to fly with one of these colored soldiers. And yeah, she went to Tuskegee, Alabama, and demanded that one of those gentlemen fly her. And then she insisted that, why are you keeping them here? Why aren't they being involved? And you know, if you've seen the movie Red Tails, am I getting one?
I think we all are getting one. I'm sorry. Doesn't work well. Being replaced.
You guys are too warm.
Please go on.
Yeah. So the military does a lot of things. A couple of other things the military did. There's a tank battalion that was created at the beginning of the war. It was an African American segregated tank battalion, 761st Tank Battalion. They don't get engaged in the war until D-Day is finished. And then George Patton makes the decision, I don't believe that these guys are going to be good tankers. I don't think that they're going to be able to hang in there. I think that they'll flee when they're fired upon. I don't think that they can hit a target. He brings them from the United States. They've been training for almost 2 years before they get engaged. And then Patton makes the other very, very important decision. He puts them at the head of his army as they leave France and go into Belgium and Holland and across Germany into Switzerland. They are the lead element of the Patton Army. Okay? Nobody has ever heard of them. They're called the Black Panthers. They're the original Black Panthers. 761st Tank Battalion. There's another unit in World War II. World War II, they trained a battalion of paratroopers, African American paratroopers. They never leave the United States during the entire war. They don't leave the United States because they can't find a commander willing to allow them to become a part of their unit. So the government says, well, we'll just make them fire jumpers. So they become the first parajumpers that jumped into fight forest fires during World War II. So when the Japanese were sending their Fugo bombs across the ocean and they would start fires, these guys would go in and put out those fires and then regroup into the next one. So we can, I mean, there are so many of those kinds of stories. It's absolutely amazing. The Lido Road. How many people know about the Lido Road? The Japanese destroyed the Lido Road going from Burma to China. And it's a supply route that the United States military wants to use. It gets destroyed. And so the United States government decides they're going to rebuild it. 80% of the engineers building that Lido Road are African American. 60% of the African American, or 60% of the engineers on the Alaskan Highway during the war are African American. The Red Ball Express. Everybody remember the movie about the Red Ball Express? Oh, you guys aren't old enough. They showed the Red Ball Express. 80% of the drivers supplying all of the stuff to keep Patton's army moving across Europe. The ammunition, the fuel, the food, the water, all of that continuously moving. 80% of the drivers on the Red Ball Express are African American. You never see them in the movie, though. So there are countless stories of basic abuse of the African American and segregation of the African American. By the way, here's a cool one. People will love this one. In the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, the Navy in the United States was integrated. They didn't care. If you could fire a gun, by God, you were a gunner. Okay? They didn't care if you're black or white or whatever. After the Civil War, the Navy did everything they possibly could to eliminate all of the African Americans from the naval force. And that didn't change until World War II. In World War II, the Navy said, we're going to do something different, guys. We're going to create 2 ships of African Americans, commanded by white officers, and we're going to test them to see if they can do a decent job. So they created 2. One was a sub chaser, and that was the Navy's idea of how we were going to handle this segregation issue. Yes, ma'am.
You're saying that prior to the Civil War, the U.S. Navy was integrated, but after they segregated it, what was their justification? What did they say about that?
Jim Crow, baby. We don't care.
So that was into the 70s and 80s?
Yep. They were segregated from 1866 going forward. They went from, I think they had about 30% of their naval manpower was African American. They went down to less than a percent. They almost completely eliminated. The Marine Corps, our Marine Corps, their answer to segregation was, we just won't have any blacks. There were no blacks in the Marine Corps, not until Korea. Okay, and that's the stuff I think is important for people to hear. I could tell you all kinds of stories about these guys riding, going to places where nobody else wanted to go. But honestly, let's learn about history. And I've spent a lot of time trying to research and understand history and make some sense of it. And those are just a few of the examples. How about another one, World War II wise? Did you guys know that the United States government decided that they were going to create bombing crews that were African American? They flew the B-25 bombers. Never left the United States. Not the entire war. Never left the United States.
You know, and yet repeatedly they proved themselves in battle.
Yeah.
They had the battle down in Richmond in the Civil War, where they put the 2 units of black infantry out front, and with their help, they went through 12 batteries and overtook 12 batteries. I mean, it turned that battle.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Yes, sir.
How close to was the movie Glory?
It was a good movie. Matter of fact, that's how I got introduced to the fact that there were blacks in the Civil War. Glory! And then they only talked about the 1 unit, right? There were 186 regiments of African Americans that fought during the Civil War on the Union side. On the Union side. Okay?
And Robert Small.
And Robert Small, absolutely. And he became commander. He commanded the battle. Yeah. So there are great stories, and you can find those great little stories. But then you wonder, well, what did the other 4 million blacks do during the Civil War?
So Ray, what were these guys doing?
These guys, they were probably veterans of the Civil War.
Talk about what they did out of Fort Worth,
Oh,
because that's really important.
all right. Well, I'm not sure I can tell you what they did at Fort Worth. You could. The African Americans, they ran the Pony Express. They built forts. They built roads. I went down to Fort Garland, by the way. This is kind of a side note. I went to Fort Garland, and they got this beautiful barracks that they set up for the African Americans. And I said, wait a minute. They never let the black guys live in those barracks. They built them, and then they had to leave because the white guys were going to come in and take over those barracks. They never got to use the barracks. They were out in the field. They were running patrols. They were not sitting inside of the fort, guarding the forts. They built them, and then they were kicked out.
I don't remember where.
Go for it.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't remember where, but somewhere they went down to Texas and they were building stuff, and everything was going great, and then they got into a scuffle with the local whites, and they slaughtered them, and then they were court-martialed, and several of the black men were hung, when they hadn't been the ones that started the fight in the first place.
So what she's talking about is there were actually 2 incidences in Texas. One was in Brownsville, where there was a scuffle over a white woman, and they said that this young black man was taking advantage of her, and they didn't like that idea. And so next thing you know, rifles are brought out, and this is just before they were thinking about sending these black guys off to go to France to fight in World War I. And they said, absolutely not. The other one was in Houston. And there were 23 African Americans that were court-martialed, and they were killed. Okay? And that was the end of, we're not sending these guys to fight in World War I. Give you another example. The nurses, they trained 1,200 African American nurses to go help out during World War I. The government made a decision, we're not going to bring any of those black nurses into the fold. As a matter of fact, only 13 of these women were brought in after the end of the First War, and then they were there just to treat the flu epidemic patients. So that's all that they were there for. Yes, ma'am.
Didn't the Buffalo Soldiers help guard the national park?
They did. One of those things that Charles Young did, his 10th Cavalry, they were guarding Yosemite, and they They were actually building more roads. They built more roads in a year than all of the other units combined. So they did an outstanding job. There are just so many stories, so very, very many positive stories. Yes, sir.
I heard a story that the Buffalo soldiers had a role to play in the Meade massacre.
Yeah, they were there. They didn't have a role. They were another one of those units that was pushed off. Oh, you're talking about when they went in and killed some of those Native Americans? Yeah, they murdered them. They were given orders, and unfortunately, in the military, an order is an order, and you fulfill it to the best of your ability. And yeah, they were there. They were involved. I know exactly what you're talking about. The government made a decision. It went to the Philippine-American War. By the way, did everybody know about the Philippine-American War? The United States government thought, well, we'll send these black guys over there to fight in the Philippines because it's hot, it's really humid. Those guys they're equipped for this stuff. They don't have a problem with that. So the government sends them over to fight, and these black guys started getting the conscience, and they said, hey, wait a minute. This is another one of those imperialistic demands that this government is telling us to go kill these little Filipinos. For what reason? We're not even sure what reason. So there were actually some African Americans that left the military and went over to the Filipino side. But most of them, they did their duty. They did what they were ordered to do. World War II. I don't want to forget this point, and I know I'm going to get to be late, and I don't want to be too late. In World War II, the African Americans had a motto, and this is the same motto that they've had from the beginning of time. They were fighting a double V. The double V was they wanted to have victory over fascism. They wanted to get rid of the fascist governments in World War II. The second V was victory over racism. And so all along, every step of the way, we're being told we're not good enough, we're not capable, we're not qualified. We want to end this racism, and that was a command and a demand that they've had from the very beginning. And so when you talk about the Buffalo Soldiers, you can't just do it in a small bubble. You've got to talk about all of the things, okay? And I just really glossed over a lot of this. I think that, again, if you go back in history and you look at it and you say, if the government had just made a decision not to make the African American 3/5 of a human being and not gone through this, how much cooperation there would have been between the races. And there wouldn't be a race, it'd be Americans, and that's what we all are. Right? So I've given you lots to think about. I hope that you find it valuable. Yes,
Here's one note to end on, perhaps.
okay.
How do you think it looks today in the military, as far as that's concerned?
Okay. So here's something. I believe that had I had an opportunity to become an officer in the United States Army, and I had understood the struggles that some of those men went through before me, I think I would have treated the military a whole lot differently than I did. I left the military after 7 years. I was a captain in the United States Army, military intelligence. I would have stayed because what is happening today is so important. When I look at people like Colin Powell, who was a lieutenant during Vietnam and comes to become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, When I look at all of those men and all of their struggles, including my great uncle's struggles, if I had understood what they had to go through to become where we are today, I would have treated it so much more differently. I think that where we're at today is so much better. I think that we are becoming in the military more of a colorblind military force, and I think people are judged based on their abilities and their talents rather than the color of their skin. And I guess my wish is that could be translated across the rest of the nation, and everybody would treat people the same. You know?
Well, Lloyd Austin's Secretary of Defense now.
Oh, there have been some real breakers. I mean, we've made some great progress, but it shouldn't be a black thing or a white thing or anything else. This guy is just totally qualified to be the guy in charge. You know.
It's almost as if the military is things that flipped. It used to be they were members of Congress that were fighting for people's rights, and the military was lagging behind. And now it's the military that's the bulwark against the racism that's running rampant through the Congress.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we've got to find a way as a nation to make those improvements. You know, I don't think I'll have that.
How do you do it, Joe?
So anyway, any other questions? Am I all right for time? Am I?
Great, can I make a secret?
I just wanted to say that I've known a couple of command sergeants that were black after, and they had more respect for them than they did for officers, because they worked their way up that way, and it was harder for them than going down those years. They were amazing. Up in one room. That's
Yes, ma'am. Oh, about my uniforms.
Yeah, I was gonna say, he has some artifacts here.
My uniforms. I am a part of the Buffalo Soldiers of the American West organization. I hold two ranks. I'm a corporal, in which case, I just kind of take orders, and in the other cases, I'm one of the black officers from the 1860s, 1870s time frame. And so I wear the rank of a captain in the United States Cavalry.
How long did the Buffalo Soldiers exist?
Okay, that's a good question. 1866 is when they were formed. They were in existence until 1954, and I always love to say this. What was significant about 1954? And if you're 69, you know the answer. That was the year I was born. Okay, so the Korean War. President Truman in 1948 made the decision. He said, I'm going to do an executive order. I'm going to eliminate this segregation in the military. And it took until 1954 before it was accomplished. So the guys that were in the 24th Infantry Regiment, those were the last guys at Fort Huachuca that ended up the last segregated unit in the military. Gosh, what happened to my presentation?
Thank you all for coming. Next time, I hope it'll be cooler.
I saw
Very much.
I'll be great too.
All right. Yes. But a lot of people You're not the only one.
Yeah, I was just thinking afterwards, when the African Americans came back from World War II, they were treated worse than the Nazi prisoners.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I am. I'll do it.
Yeah.
Hey, oh, I'm hot.
Oh, that's all right, I am too. But we're sitting by the fan.
It's warm.
Nice job, right? Thank you. You learned a lot. You learned a lot. We heard that all of us soldiers actually were taken at a West Point, teaching the officers.
Oh, yeah.
And yet they were not allowed to actually, they weren't allowed to bring the team.
After Charles Young graduated in 1889, they don't allow another African American into West Point until Benjamin Oliver Davis Jr. starts in 1932. So almost 50 years between the time that the government just said flat out, you know, and they don't have any black congressmen any longer, so there's nobody making nominations for blacks to come and be a part of the military academy.
I just want to thank you again for coming to your speech. Your talk is always so informative.
Good. I hope I'm not boring people yet.
So, did you go in Fort Collins? They had a whole display of buffalo soldiers.
Well, not in Fort Collins.
No, like Fort Collins.
Oh, at Fort. Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, I was there to kind of guide that along.
Yeah, I wondered.
Yeah.
I haven't.
Yeah, they invited me to come down and be a part of that.
Yeah, I haven't.
And I had to tell them, I says, hey, you guys are, it's a nice story what you're telling. I said, but you got to remember, these black soldiers were not in that fort very often. They came in, they resupplied, and they were back out the gate again. They didn't get to spend a lot of time inside of the gate.
And that's what's important. Yeah. And this is what we've got to push for in our education system.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank
I
you.
agree. You're very welcome.
It's really sad. Last time I went to Roger, there was a voting ticket class.
Where was that?
Oh. I
Oh,
called her Steele because I didn't have the 85 to 80 in it, otherwise I got it.
oh my goodness.
That got away.
Well, I'm sorry that it got away too. You know, Ruth is gone.
Yeah.
She kind of, it's okay. Well, I appreciate your, if you find anything else, if you find anything else, you let me know. Okay?
I have some photographs I keep forgetting to send you.
Okay. Yeah.
I have what's called a room of very short snorter. And I didn't find any, there's like 50 on outside. Are you familiar with short snorters?
No.
Well, it's more of a beautiful state, and I don't use it in the room. And, you know, I mean, your regiment, they show me your note. And if you don't have it, you won't even drink.
I understand.
You know, they have a token. But these are compromised. There's like 46 guys named on the side.
Wow. I would be real happy to notice all this. I have quite a few. Yeah, and actually in the library, there is a book on the fourth floor that talks about the war. So each one of the wars, it says the people that are dead from those wars, so all like, they're all listed in the book, and there's a couple of pages on each one of them. Might be a good way to find them. And if you don't want to do that, I'm starting to digitize them. Yeah, it's on 4th floor. And it's they want like super books out there.
A lot of these guys who work on that road,
Oh, yeah.
that might explain why I can't find it.
Do you want the chairs put away? Are you sure? Yes. Too much work and it's hot in here. Do you still want to come volunteer?
Okay, I'll let you guys know.
Yeah, I told Rose about you to contact you, but you may have to contact us.
That's okay.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Yeah, I would love to see it. I would.
Yeah. What? No, indigenous, the indigenous planning.
I know that, yeah, I know that, I was supposed to reload my wallet with my cards and I never did. I am.
My brother is. Did they force you to write with your right hand?
I told him that was an impossibility. I actually about cut my thumb off when I was a kid. And my dad corrected me with that. He said, Ray, if you don't start using that thumb again, you're gonna have to become right-handed. And I told my dad, there's no way that will ever happen. But I about severed that completely off. Yeah, I'd love to see it. I would love it, and especially if I can figure out names. So I did a presentation on the black doctors. We had black doctors. And,
Have you been up to the
rodeo
or I didn't know, but that was a black doctor.
that's good.
May I
Hey,
have,
I'll come myself.
may I have one of your
Good talk, always good to
sheets of
hear you and see you.
Are you just trying to get out of it? Yeah, she sent me, thanks for saying. Find the StreamYard should be the first tab on the upper right and this blue or red button and the screen.
Oh.
Museum of Here it is. And this is, oh, here we go, in the broadcast. Not exits, exit is like when you're left the screen line and you're outside, you have to watch it from home. Turn off the video camera.
Is there a way we can talk to you?
Are we supposed to put everything away? No.